existence. If you're saying at the very moment of it's maintaining, like, because it's not, again, I think the argument is not that this necessary thing is originally caused everything and then everything else kind of changed from that. No, this very moment and yesterday's very moment and tomorrow's very moment, each of them are grounded in this necessary thing.
See, I just don't get it, right? So you believe in brute contingency, but you're adopting a principle to restrict the brute contingencies that you encounter. So why is it that you're drawing the line there rather than elsewhere? I'm just trying to understand that.
So is it with me or Reshad?
I thought it was me, but you can jump in, Rob, because
I don't know.
I'm not understanding where. Yeah, I'm not understanding where I'm claiming that there are brute contingencies.
Well, that's what libertarian free will is, right? It's the belief that free choices are brutally contingent.
I'm not following. Free choices are brutally contingent.
Yeah.
I'm not claiming that we have libertarian free will. I'm not even sure how libertarian free will applies to this necessary thing. It is
the view you're describing is libertarian free will.
That the necessary thing has this unbounded ability to determine or act.
Yeah, what you're describing is libertarian free will. You're saying he's not determined by his reason. He's not determined by things like his desires to choose one thing rather than another. Right.
Yeah, there are no other conditions to determine it.
Yeah, so you're just saying that you accept brute contingency. So what's the PSR doing there?
No, I'm trying to understand why, when there are no external conditions, why that entails a brute contingency.
Because there's a fact that's unexplained.
It's explained by the choice of the necessary thing.
No, that's the fact which is unexplained, the choice.
Why is that unexplained?
The choice is explained because the antecedent conditions don't explain it. It doesn't have any explanation.
The free choice that it's making is the explanation. It is choose.
No, that's what it's saying is unexplained. The free choice.
So I'm failing to see how it's unexplained, right? Like when I say this necessary thing is determining all the properties.
Just listen. What explains why the agent does A rather than B?
The choice of the agent.
No, I just said that's what we're talking about, the choice of A rather than B. So if I ask you what explains why he chooses A rather than B, right, you telling me his choice to do A rather than B explains it, right, is not an answer to the question.
Okay, so that's why that's a brute fact.
Yes.
Or a brute contingent fact.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so what is the problem with that?
I'm trying to understand how you get this PSR, right? You don't accept the strong PSR, right? So you're saying, so if you don't accept the strong PSR, you're just agreeing that there's brute contingency in the world, right? But if your interlocutor accepts that there's brute contingency in the world, what's going to motivate him to accept this PSR, right? The point of a PSR is to deal with the fact that some people aren't comfortable with the idea of brute contingencies, right? But the only way to avoid brute contingencies is to adopt necessitarianism, right? If you adopt necessitarianism, there's no contingency argument, right? So the question is, why would anybody accept some weaker form of the PSR? What would motivate them to accept it? I don't get it.
Yeah, so if I put a pin in that for a moment, I know, Rob, you said you have to go. Maybe we can continue this point in the future. This question of the arguments for it having agency or choice. I think the other one we spoke about, the only other one would be knowledge. Obviously, if it is the thing grounding all things, then it's only, I think logically it entails that it must have the capacity, or it knows the things that it's maintaining.
I completely disagree with that as well.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, maybe so. Cool, man. It's good chatting.
You too.
I'll hit you up later sometime.
Bye.
Yeah, Jack, I heard you mention this one previously, and what is it that you're presenting? You're saying that there's no reason to accept the PSR in a weak form, so therefore the contingency argument doesn't hold.
Well, look, there's so many problems. I just think the contingency argument is complete trash. Right? I think it's absolute garbage. Right? So we can go over all the different issues there are with it. Right? But one issue is that I don't understand why anybody would accept the PSR. Right? Okay. It seems like the only reason to accept it is because you want a justification for believing that God exists, right? Which is just motivated reasoning.
Not necessarily, but I guess what I'm trying to understand is when you say it's garbage, right? Like, so you're objecting to not that the PSR is not logical or that that there's a contradiction in it. You're just saying, why should I accept it, right? So it's kind of like if I present an argument like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. I could say, well, why should I accept that all men are mortal, right? So I'm asking the question to challenge the premise, but I'm not necessarily presenting any problem or objection to it, right? That's what I'm hearing. If that's
You
not
can,
what you're presenting.
you can construct a formally valid contingency argument. Surely there are formally valid contingency arguments, right? But I don't think what we're interested in is formal validity, right? It's not hard to construct formally valid arguments, right? We're trying to construct convincing arguments.
What do you think this argument is convincing someone of?
Well, I assume you're trying to argue for the existence of God, right?
Not necessarily. I think this argument only takes you as far as a necessary thing.
Well, I thought that you were trying to argue from there being a necessary thing to it being some kind of agent.
That would be a second order argument, right?
Yeah,
right.
So that's what you're really interested in, right? Is trying to argue for the existence of God, right?
So obviously I'm constructing like a series of arguments, right? But
yeah, your aim is to justify belief in God. That's your aim, right? And I'm just saying it's very easy to gerrymander a principle, right, which concludes in a necessary being, which a principle with which you can construct an argument from that principle that it would entail a necessary being, and then construct subsidiary arguments from there being a necessary being to there being a God, right? Now, I don't think any of that is going to be of much philosophical interest, right? But my point is, you've got a problem right at the outset with your gerrymandered principle, because why would your interlocutor accept that principle? I just don't get it.
Yeah, that's fair. When you say that it's very easy to, what would you claim is the strongest argument that someone would present?
Strongest argument for what?
So if you're saying it's easy to create this, sorry, one second.
Yeah, I'm fine with the notion that there was something, but once you apply agency, the burden of proof shifts to you.
Yeah, definitely the burden of proof has been on me the entire time. I think to present the argument for a necessary thing, to present the second order arguments that they are that it would be logical, that it is eternal or has power or has agency. Of course, all of those are I can't just claim them and say, well, it must be true, right? Like if I just said, well, this necessary thing is also very loving, right? Like I'm not presenting any argument for that. I'm just making a claim for it. But I thought in each stage I was presenting an argument and not just saying this is true. But I think Jack is addressing a different point. Jack is saying, great, this is all fine. Like I'm not saying any of this is wrong, but why should I even start from this principle in order to build this entire argument on it? Is that fair, Jack?
Yeah, I'm saying that there's no reason for anybody to be moved by this argument who isn't already a theist.
I mean, the question of whether or not someone's moved by it, of course, it's up to each individual to evaluate this argument.
I'm saying they don't have a reason to accept the principle. I'm asking you what the reason is for them to accept the principle.
I mean, you could argue that there's no reason to accept any argument, right? Like we spoke earlier about, the problem of other minds. I don't have to accept the principle that the inference from my mind to your mind is
the point is, we're not trying to construct an argument for the existence of other minds, right? We're trying to construct an argument for the existence of God.
Right, but I'm giving
and
you
that argument.
That argument is
directed. That argument is directed to atheists, right? So why would an atheist? Why would anybody accept that principle?
Rob, why do you accept the principle of sufficient reason? Why do you think it's intuitive or reasonable to consider that things have grounding or dependency or some explanation for them?
But you don't think everything does.
Yeah, I do. And Rob,
wait, did you ask me?
You agree that there are brutally contingent things, right? So you draw a line and say there are some. We just went over this.
No, I asked you how they're brutally contingent. I didn't say
yeah, and I explained to you.
I agree to that.
I explained to you how. So you don't have a problem with brute contingency.
No, I don't have. If brute contingency means that, like, if I'm making a choice and it's indeterminate. 1 second. Like you're saying that because there is no, like, the choice itself is not the explanation. Like it's the grounding of the choice is not the explanation.
Yeah, that just means it's brutally contingent. If it can't be explained, that means it's brutally contingent. So you don't have a problem with brute contingency.
Just 1 second. So when a necessary thing is unexplained, it's explained by itself.
I wasn't talking about necessary.
I'm asking though. Does that make it a contingent fact?
No.
So what's the difference between those two?
What's the difference between a necessary and a contingent fact?
What's the difference between a brute contingent fact and a necessary thing when both of them, or a necessary fact when both of them don't have an explanation outside of themselves?
The difference is that one is necessary and one is contingent. So one is going to be a brute necessity. Well, all necessities are brute on that view, right? And some contingent facts are brute.
But what's the difference between a brute necessity and a brute contingency?
One is contingent and one is necessary.
By contingent, do you mean dependent on some other things? So it's like
no, contingent means only true in some possible worlds.
So what's an example of a brute contingent fact?
Well, people are going to disagree as to what is brutally contingent or not.
Is there a
Right?
disagreement
I mean,
on what's
sometimes
necessarily?
some people think that there are physical events that are indeterministic, right? Such as like the collapse of a wave function, something like that, right? Or the emission of an alpha particle, right? In quantum mechanics, those are often taken to be non-deterministic events. So something like that is going to be an example of brute contingency. But some people think that physics, quantum mechanics should be understood as in some deterministic interpretation, right? So, I mean, that's a dispute
I think
between
the
physicists
problem
or
is even deeper, right?
philosophers of science.
Yeah, the problem is even deeper. Not everyone even agrees what are necessary facts.
Well, again, yeah. See, I take it that you're invoking some notion of necessity, like metaphysical necessity, right? So it's not going to be something that it's not going to be a notion of necessity that is derived from axioms, presumably, like axioms of logic, right? So it's not going to be logical necessity, and it's not going to be a notion of necessity that has to do with laws of nature, right? So the space of possible worlds will be delimited by the worlds that follow these laws, these natural laws. But if it's neither of those, I'm not really clear on what it is, right? So that's just going to be a whole other set of issues. Is what is this modality that's being picked out? And again, it's hard for me to imagine why anybody would accept that kind of modality, right? Who wasn't already friendly to the argument. So I just don't see what the interest in the argument is, you know?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand how this is useful, because what happens is when someone presents an argument, right, you evaluate it, and then you say, well, here's a problem with the argument. But if you say, well, why is this even a useful argument, right? Like, so ultimately, I could say that about everything, right? Like, why should I even think about this concept?
I'm asking you to justify a premise in the argument. That's a standard thing to do when criticizing arguments, right?
No, you're not. You're not asking. You're not asking to justify. You're asking.
Yeah, I'm asking
why.
you
Why should
what
I? You're
justifies
asking.
acceptance of that principle. Why would it be irrational to reject that principle? That's what I'm asking you.
Why would it be rational? Yeah. So why would it be rational to accept it?
Why would it be irrational to reject it? Right. That's what I'm asking you. Why would it be irrational to reject that principle?
I'm not claiming that it would be irrational to reject it.
So why would anybody accept it?
So you're not presenting a reason why someone shouldn't accept it. You're just asking me to convince you why you should.
But is your purpose with this argument to convince people that they ought to believe in God?
No.
Why are you running the argument then?
I find it an interesting discussion for someone to think through what we can know about reality, right? Whether you're convinced of the argument or not.
So is it an interesting question? Is it an interesting
Let
question?
me
Look,
land the point here.
it's just going to waste my time, right?
Is it an interesting question? If you're not interested to have the conversation, that's fine. That's why I was talking to Rob. I've talked to you about this before. You asked this question. You don't present a problem with the argument.
I'm asking you why would you arrive at that principle? How do you arrive at that principle, right? You don't have a problem with brute contingency, right? Because I can imagine somebody saying, look, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that things are unexplained, right? So I'm going to adopt a principle, right, where everything has an explanation, right? But that would commit you to necessitarianism, right? So you don't like that consequence. So you say, okay, well, I have to give up on the strong PSR. So I'm asking you, how do you decide where to draw the line between which brute contingencies you want to exclude, right, and which you want to include when you adopt this principle, right? I'm asking what motivates you to accept this principle.
Yeah, if you're asking me personally, I think it's not counterintuitive. It is intuitive. That's not an evidence for it, but I'm failing to find reasons to reject it. It sounds like when I consider reality, it's reasonable that things are contingent, and they conform to that understanding of what that is. To think that there is a foundational reason. To think that there is a foundational reason.
Spell out what the principle is that you accept.
That things have a more fundamental underlying reason or explanation. I think dependency, Rob is not here anymore, but dependency is another factor that's associated with that.
No, but you don't, look, you do think there are facts that lack explanation. So that description doesn't capture the principle that you hold.
So going back to the brute contingent fact of choice, right? To describe that an agent, by its own volition, is choosing for some reason that I don't know. Like I can't explain what that reason is or how that reasoning process works. But it is indeterminate. It's not determinate. There is nothing to make it determinate, right? For that reason, then I don't see that as a contingency. or a group contingent fact. Like I see that there is an explanation there, I just don't know what it is. That doesn't mean that there's not, that I accept that there's not an explanation there.
You're saying, but if there were an explanation, it would entail the fact. That's what you were denying.
What was I denying?
That antecedent conditions entail the outcome.
In an indeterminate process, antecedent conditions entail the
No,
outcome?
I'm saying if it's indeterministic, it's brutally contingent.
So I'm explaining that brutally contingent would mean that it is that there is not an explanation, right? That I accept that there is not an explanation. Brute contingency doesn't mean that I think that there's an explanation, I just don't know what it is. Right? There's a difference there. Like all contingent facts, they're contingent, they have an explanation. I don't claim to know what all those explanations are. So by saying that I don't know what they are, does that mean that I think that they're brute contingent facts? No, right?
The issue is not epistemic, right? The issue is whether the outcome is entailed by antecedent conditions or not, right? The epistemic question is a separate one.
Yeah, so then the antecedent conditions, when there are no outside conditions, it doesn't mean that there are not that there's not an internal explanation, right? Like when I make a choice for something, I can tell you that I ate vanilla ice cream today. You'll say why, right? And I'll say, I'm not really sure why, but there is a why, right? Because clearly it's a choice that I made, right? So I wouldn't consider that by not knowing what that why is, and by acknowledging that.
Yeah, but he's saying that the matter in question is not
by acknowledging that they're not determined by some previous factor, by recognizing that I did make that choice. That's not acknowledging that it's a root contingent fact. That's acknowledging that it's a contingent event, but I don't know exactly what it's explained by.
So we aren't talking
but the point.
The issue is not epistemic, right? That's a separate question, right? The question is there an explanation which entails the outcome, right? If that's the case, it's not indeterministic.
So everything has an explanation that determines the outcome.
And if that's the case, then you're a necessitarian. And there's no contingency argument. Contingency arguments proceed from contingent facts to necessary facts, right? But if all facts are necessary, then there's no contingency argument.
No, I'm not saying all facts are necessary. I'm saying that the contingency argument is not whether facts are contingent or not, right? We're talking not just that the apple is the truth or the statement that the apple is orange, but the grounding of the explanation of why the apple is orange, right? It has some prior explanation.
Do you understand? Do you understand that there's a true dichotomy between necessitarianism and brute contingency?
I'm not entirely familiar with necessitarianism, but
necessitarianism
it's a view.
Says that
there's only one.
That all true propositions are necessary.
All true propositions are necessary. Even contingent facts.
No, there's no contingent facts.
No contingency. Yeah, I follow what you're saying. No, I think the argument that I'm presenting is not holding to that view. The argument that I'm presenting is that there are contingent things and contingent facts, and they're grounded by other contingent facts, which are ultimately grounded by the necessary thing.
What makes you think that a necessary fact can explain all contingent facts? Why can't there just be a big conjunctive contingent fact which is self-explanatory? What makes you think that the set of all contingent facts aren't self-explanatory?
I think that what makes me think that is that if I have a contingent fact A and contingent fact B, and the very nature of their contingency is that they have a fundamental explanation, why would I lead? What would be reasonable to think that those two contingent facts together would somehow become different than the contingent facts?
Well, I'm not saying that they could be. I'm not saying that there could be different. I'm not telling you that. What I'm saying is, why can't the conjunction of all contingent facts be self-explanatory?
Yeah. So
right? Rather than have a necessary fact explain those things.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of reality, right? So I have 10 microwaves that are all contingent things, right? So one microwave is a contingent thing. 2 microwaves are still 2 contingent things. Whether they're 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or any grouping of them, any set of them, why would that then make microwaves not contingent?
I don't see what you're trying to say here, right?
I'm saying it's intuitive.
So let's just say there's a fact, right? And we can just label the fact as fact C, right? For fact C, if it's a contingent fact, either there's going to be a contingent explanation for C or a necessary explanation for C, right? Correct. So if there's a contingent explanation for C, right, then, well, it's already in conjunction, right? When you say that there's an explanation for C that's contingent, right? Let's just imagine that there's just contingent facts all the way down. I don't see why that would be a problem in terms of explaining like the chain of all contingent facts that exist. Because if you don't accept that, if you don't expect that you could only have a contingent explanation for C, then you're going to say, well, it's a necessary explanation for C, right? And so at that point, if you're going to say that there's a necessary explanation for C, well, then at that point, I mean, why would you even appeal to just having a type of fact that could be explained only in virtue of another necessary fact, right? So are you aware of the fact that the strong PSR commits you to necessitarianism?
Yeah, that's what Jack was mentioning. What I think is interesting here is that what you laid out is the example that I gave you, right? And we can use another example of which I spoke to Ron about earlier, of red triangles, right? It would be a necessary fact that the triangle has 3 sides. It would be a contingent fact that the triangle is red.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I had 10 red triangles, would the 10 contingent facts, or if I had
but under the strong PSR,
just 1 second though. I know that I'm understanding the strong PSR angle of it. What I'm saying is that if I explain the redness of the triangle by something like I don't know, the explanation of how light functions or particles, etc., and that's a contingent fact as well. Why would the combination of those 2 contingent facts lead me to think that somehow that would then become the necessary fact about a triangle?
No, it more has to do. So imagine if there is, let's say that there is a conjunction of all contingent truths, and we're just going to call that B, right? So if B, let's say, is contingent, right? Since any of the true conjunctions with at least one contingent conjunct is going to be contingent, right? You either have a sufficient reason for, let's say, B, and we can just call that R, right? So R is either going to be contingent or necessary, right? If R is contingent, then R is just going to be a conjunct of what B is, right? But you can't have, under the strong PSR, you can't have, let's say, a contingent conjunct, right, of a conjunction to explain that conjunction of itself. So you can't have a contingent conjunction of that explanation in question, which is just R, right? So the only other option would be that R is necessary, right? But then if R is necessary, then C would have a necessary explanation, right? So in other words, at that point, C would be necessary. Well, B, yeah, sorry. So at that point, B would be necessary, right? If you could only explain, if you have.
I'm losing you there. That's why I'm losing you with why you're going from R must either be contingent or necessary when R is a. I don't understand.
R is just a sufficient reason for B, which is the fact in question.
Because we combined many contingent facts and we called that B, why did I give a contingent explanation for B? Like
I don't understand.
Yeah.
So R, okay, give an example.
Correlate them to the microwave example, right? So I have the microwave is contingent thing A. The fundamental the molecules and the chemistry of the microwave is contingent thing B. The fundamental particles are contingent thing C, right? So you're saying these combined could be contingent thing D, right? Then you're saying what is the explanation of contingent thing D? I'm not understanding why you're saying that together they must have an explanation. Each of them is the foundational explanation of the previous one. So why, when I put,
but that's only if you think that the conjunct of all contingent facts isn't self-contingent, which is just what R means here. If you say that R, which R is just a sufficient reason for the very fact in question. Well, if you think that R is contingent, right, the sufficient reason for the very fact in question is contingent, then you're just conceding that the conjunction of that explanation, right, that sufficient reason is going to be contingent. But under the strong PSR, you can't have a contingent conjunction of explanations.
Yeah,
you can't have that.
So I'm asking you, I'm trying to understand why you're presenting the conjunction and then saying that the conjunction must also have an explanation. The conjunction is not something.
No, I'm not saying the conjunction in of itself has an explanation. I'm just saying that the sufficient reason.
The explanation for B.
Yeah, R is the explanation for B here, right?
So then you're saying that the set of things is another thing that has an explanation.
Well, if R is a contingent explanation for B, right, and it's in conjunction.
That's what I'm challenging.
But it's either the case that the sufficient reason for B is one that's contingent or one that's necessary, right? So if you take, okay, so then what's
right? So
then what's the third option?
You're making it seem like there is an option here. I'm saying that there's 10